Thank you very much. Well, good evening, everybody. It's really wonderful to see you all. It's my great pleasure to welcome you very warmly to Engineering the Future, the Venture Catalyst. I'm Julian Epps, the Dean of Engineering. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Gadigal as the traditional custodians of the land and the waters that we're meeting on. Pay my respects to elders past and present, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are present here with us this evening. It's really remarkable that Indigenous people were living sustainably and innovating right here tens of thousands of years ago. Just earlier this year, UNSW launched its new 10-year strategy. You've just seen the video. It's titled Progress for All. It places societal impact at the centre of the university's priorities and lists advancing economic and social prosperity as one of the key goals. Although we have big ambitions for the next decade, we're already off to a great start. Why is that? Because UNSW was named the most entrepreneurial university in the Asia Pacific in 2024 and has ranked number one in the country for the largest number of new startup and spin-out companies, particularly founded through technology for 3 years running. And of course, as you'd expect, many of those technology companies are coming from engineering. As the largest faculty of engineering in Australia, we really have a key role to play in the future of Australian innovation. We're preparing our own faculty strategy currently, and even though it hasn't been released yet, I can just share a few parts of it. We plan to embed entrepreneurship into our culture so that every research team in the faculty is considering a new venture, a new company, or even a new global industry in what they're doing. We're planning to influence government policy and grow public support for the development of new high technology, high value industries in Australia. I'm sure that's something many people here have a passion for. And we'll be doing this not by ourselves, but in partnership. So please join us. To discuss the risks, the rewards, the realities of engineering entrepreneurship, this evening we have a highly distinguished panel. And on behalf of the faculty, I'd like to thank all of our panellists this evening. I'd now like to introduce our panel chair for the evening, Deputy Dean, Industry Engagement, Innovation and Research, Professor Ian Gibson.
Thank you, Julian. Impact from research. It means different things to different people. It can be hard to define and even harder to measure. But I think most of us know it when we see it. In 2024-25, the Australian federal government spent a bit over $14 billion of taxpayers' money, that's our money, yours and mine, on research and development. And according to the Federal Department of Industry, Science and Resources in the same period, Australian universities spent slightly more than that. If you add that up, it's about $1,000 for each of us. And we'd like to know what we get for our $1,000. While Australia's spend on R&D is well short of OECD averages, we would like to think we get the best possible impact from that spend. Most universities will tell you they are focused on solving the world's biggest problems. But frankly, I'm not always sure that that's always the case. For us at UNSW, we take this challenge of contributing to global prosperity very seriously. In Australia, almost all the universities are statutory entities, and they have a statutory purpose, which is teaching and research. But they're not in a position to commercialise the technology they create themselves. This is always done in partnership with others. Traditionally, this might involve doing some sort of licensing deal with an industry partner, and we do plenty of that. But there is a strong body of evidence that the so-called self-licensing model, i.e. a spin-out model, leads to higher value outcomes. For UNSW, almost all of the very high impact technologies our researchers have brought to the world were translated into practice this way. This is something that is indeed replicated all around the world. We're not special in that sense. Our contributions to solar photovoltaics, polymer membranes and secure computing systems are just some of the examples where our people have enabled global scale industry changes with a profound positive impact for society. I would argue that it's actually pretty easy to spin out a company from a university. I saw a statistic the other day that something like 70% of UNSW spin-outs survive the first 5 years. And I think the average spin-out, the average startup, I think it's like 15%. They might survive, but have they contributed? Tonight we asked the question, how do you go about creating a new technology-based enterprise that will not just make a slightly better widget, but one that will lead to global positive change? And to help us with this question, we are honoured to have with us a panel of some of the world's most impactful entrepreneurs. Our panel are globally renowned megastars, some of which have actually flown in internationally just for tonight, and have each in their own way brought technology to market that has a fundamental and profound change to the way the world works. They've done this both within university environments as well as non-university environments. So if you're interested in having an impact, in changing the world, and creating an enterprise that will do that, it's worth listening to them. So now it is my immense pleasure to introduce our panel. And rather than read out a long bio, and believe me, our panel have done a lot of stuff, I've asked them to just introduce themselves with a couple of minute overview of their journey and whatever message they'd like to convey. So our first panel member is Dr. Bill Jeffrey. Bill is a non-executive director and chair of Diraq and general partner at Airstream Venture Partners. And he probably knows more about the US science and technology ecosystem than anyone else on the planet. Everyone, Bill Jeffrey. Bill.
Oh, thank you, Ian. It's going to be hard to live up to that introduction. And it is such an honor to be here with the University of New South Wales and with the distinguished panel with Michelle and David. Look forward to working with you on this. So my journey, I've spent my entire career in deep technology. And my career, when I think about it, really was a random walk. I didn't really plan exactly where I was going to go, but what's happened is that at each of the major milestones, that places I've worked, I learned something new about how to translate deep technology into something practical. Probably the first major stop on my journey was actually running an office at DARPA, which is the US Department of Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And there we were taught the Heilmeyer Catechism. These are 7 questions that any research project better be able to answer, and they are deceptively hard to answer. And so I actually suggest all of you find them. But even then, DARPA did not transition a lot of its technology. And that made me think pretty deeply about why. The usual answer given was that it hit the funding valley of death. That is, there's this mythical hole between where you get sort of early applied funding versus development. Well, I'm here to tell you that's not the reason, right? The lack of funding is a result of something else. It's not the root cause. And the root cause is almost always that there is risk that was in the adoption of the technology that wasn't considered. And that became really important. And in fact, DARPA is now starting some programs to specifically address some of those risks to help in that transition. But after the September 11th event, I was called into the White House. And one of the things that we were trying to do was really accelerate counterterrorism research and technology into practical applications. And I learned at that point how important government policy can be in either accelerating or hindering technology development. And that was another important lesson. After that, I ended up becoming the director of the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is the US's Metrology Institute. And there I learned a whole new aspect about transitioning technology, and that was the ecosystem that has to live in. The standards, metrology, the supply chain, the manufacturability of things. Those were not considered in some of the previous positions I was in, and those became huge stumbling blocks to get technology out the door. And that's often one of the main reasons why a technology won't work, is because it hasn't thought through all of those other aspects of the ecosystem. Is it ready? If you want an example, think photonics. Since 1990, photonics was going to be the next big revolution. And now, I think it's actually on the cusp of becoming the next big thing, but it didn't because the ecosystem wasn't there, the manufacturability wasn't there, the packaging wasn't there. And then after NIST, I ended up as the CEO and president of HR Labs, which was a research company that specific job was to bring disruptive technologies into large aerospace and automotive companies. That was probably the hardest thing I've ever done, because you have huge companies that will have a number of reasons why they don't want a disruptive technology to come in. It's not invented here. Their whole research department will argue against it and such. And it's almost intractable. So if you're developing a new technology and you're thinking you're going to go directly into a large company, there's probably an easier path. And then the last real step on the journey was when I had the honor of becoming the CEO of SRI International. Now at SRI, we have done over 100 spin-outs, and some of them have been very successful. Many of them failed, but it's created hundreds of billions of dollars of market cap. And there, what we did was we actually tried to institutionalize a process. So we actually identified all of these things, the impediments that I talked about throughout his career, and we created sort of a 4-stage process for a technology that was coming out of one of our labs to actually become a spin-out. And time will tell whether or not that's the right model, but right now it's been reasonably successful, and it is a process that I think universities can also adapt. But it's really been an exciting journey, and as I said, at each step, you've got to look back and understand what works, what doesn't work. And I would tell you there's an awful lot of lessons that you learn from the things that didn't work. But it's really been an honor and a pleasure, and I look forward to working and discussing this more with the panel. So thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Our next panellist is Dr. Michelle Perugini. Michelle is the Head of Commercialisation at the University of South Australia, CEO of UniSA Ventures, and the Chair of the Board at Qubigen. Michelle Perugini.
Thank you. Hi everyone. I need to lift these up as usual. Thanks for having me. I've had a very non-traditional journey through being a scientist researcher to founding 3 of my own companies and now teaching researchers and scientists how to become entrepreneurs. So I feel quite fortunate. I actually started my career doing a PhD in medicine, spent around 13 years in the oncology sector as a research scientist, and I actually thought I was going to be in the lab forever. But I got a bit of an itch, and I got a bit frustrated with kind of the continuous grant funding cycle and not seeing the fruits of our labour in terms of that research. And I really became interested in how we could have greater impact by translating that research out to real world problems. And so in 2007, I founded my first company. Bill and I have something in common. That technology was partly through Department of Defence and DARPA collaboration. It was around AI and consumer behaviour modelling, and I won't go into the details, but it was a really interesting journey of commercialising something that was really new and emerging in the AI sector, and really building a global company across 6 different industries and having offices in the US and Australia. Exited that company in 2015 and then started Prestigen, which is a healthcare AI company where we commercialised some technology around using AI and computer vision to analyse eggs and embryos during the IVF process. We commercialised that and sold into 48 countries prior to selling that technology last year. And now I'm working in the AI drug discovery space, and I've gone back to the university sector to help really drive translation outcomes from research. And it really is a passion area for me. I think we're spending a lot of money. We've done all the hard work in Australia around getting a really sophisticated and well-respected research capability. But we don't do a great job of translating that research out into meaningful impact. And so that's my role at the university. And I'm just really interested to talk about kind of how some of the incentives and drivers and complexities around doing that. And as Bill alluded to, it is a wicked problem. It's not just about funding, it's about KPIs, it's about incentives. It's about the mindset and the culture within the university sector. It's about the mindset and culture of university researchers. And I look forward to talking on the panel about this topic. Thanks.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Michelle. And last, but by absolutely not least, our next panellist is David Skellern AO. David was the co-founder of Radiata Communications, former CEO of NICTA, and he's a visiting professor at Imperial College London and an adjunct at Macquarie University. David. Have you been messing with your microphone again?
A mechanical challenge I'm not used to. Thanks, Ian, and I'm also extremely pleased to be here tonight and to be invited. So I've spent my life, and it's been a long journey. I've been an active engineer for 52 years. And for all of it, really, I've been involved with semiconductors one way or another. Originally, semiconductors that were off-the-shelf components that I built into electronic systems. And progressively, as I went through and found problems with those things and wanted to do stuff more at the bleeding edge, I got into designing chips and then designing the materials for chips and then some of the processing for them. So I've had a long history of thankfully, at an amazing time in the world for the advances in semiconductors. So I started life as a radio astronomer, did a PhD in radio astronomy and decided, actually I started working first, but then I decided to get back to the university and did a PhD in radio astronomy, but I was not good at astronomy and I really enjoyed building the instrument and ended up doing that for a number of years. And I'll just quickly run through the roles I had. I had 26 years in the university sector, the first 15 at Sydney University and then 10 at Macquarie University. Then I started a company, Radiata, which did the world's first high-speed Wi-Fi chips. And then I worked for Cisco for, that whole period of private industry was only 7 years. Then I ran NICTA, the National ICT Research Centre, for 6 years. And since I retired in 2011, I've been a regular visitor at Imperial College in London, where I'm a visiting professor. I spend at least 3 months a year there, and I've actually spent 4.5 years since 2011 there. And I'm an adjunct professor at Macquarie. Now, what I've done in between times is progressively learn how, and in my own research, I've focused on building things. I want to describe the type of research I did. I call it use-inspired research, which was the mantra we had at NICTA, that you think about the progress you want to make in the context of a product or a process or a service or some sort, and you target your research at doing it that way to get to that goal. And that's fundamentally what I've been progressing since I decided to get out of radio astronomy, because people at barbecues didn't want to talk to you for very long. And I thought that if I could actually, build things that people would use, this would be a better use of my life. Okay, so through that journey, I've learned a lot. I have to totally resonate with our previous panel members, in particular about ecosystems. understanding your ecosystem is critically important, and it's often the reason you fail, often the reason startups fail. And so that's really important. I got involved in a venture capital company after I retired, and so we were involved in quite a number of spin-outs. NICTA itself had 7 spin-outs while I was there, and we were able to go through the life cycle of a number of those companies and see how they go. And so, you know, there's a number of, and those companies were all spin-outs from universities, right? And so that process of spinning out from universities is something that I've been heavily involved in. And hopefully I'll get to talk more about it now because my time's up. Thanks.
Okay, thanks everyone. So we will be taking audience questions via Slido. The QR code is over there, so I encourage everyone to fire up Slido and give us your questions as we go. So
Should I duck? Should I step?
It's all good? All right, panel, let's kick off. So this is to anyone can take this one first. So if we all put the effort into translating our research results from the lab into real-world outcomes, we would like them to be as impactful as possible. Generally, big-scale impact comes from big ideas rather than incrementalism. And it's probably fair to say that within a university context, it's pretty easy to be incremental. It's safe. It's safe for publishing. It's safe for getting grants. How do we promote a culture of significant innovation and original thinking that leads to these big impacts within a university context? Bill?
Oh, I was going to point to that. It's a great question.
You first.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the more disruptive the technology will be, the harder it is to actually get a customer to understand the value proposition. And so I agree with you that one of the things that, particularly DARPA's whole mission, right, is to do the disruptive technologies for the Department of Defense. The place where they really need to concentrate on is the customer engagement. You're solving a pain point, or you're creating something that doesn't exist today. You're going to need someone to buy it. And so you're going to need to have a lot of conversations. Typically, for a startup, we would require that they have at least 15 to 20 serious customer engagements before we would actually give them funding, where they really have to understand the use case. And that use case that they develop needs to be a multi-billion-dollar potential, and it needs to have a barrier to entry, or we like to call it a competitive advantage or a competitive disadvantage to the opponents that was sustainable. It has to be something that was real and that you could maintain. But if you couldn't convince customers that they needed this, then that was going to wasn't going to succeed. Yeah. And the more disruptive, the more time and effort you need to be putting into that beginning phase. I don't know whether or not you've got any additional things.
Michelle?
Maybe I'll jump in.
Yeah.
I completely agree with you. I think the industry engagement and having kind of customer need, and actually even understanding customer need whilst you're developing the research for a translational purpose is really important. Maybe I'll focus my comments then on culture and incentives, because I think the incrementalism, is that even a word? I don't even know if that's a word. Incrementalism. Anyway, we make up. We're scientists. We're allowed to make up words. It's not the fault of the scientists that they're living hand to mouth with grant funding that incentivises them to do the next thing that needs to be done in order to get the publications that unlock the next level of grant funding, because otherwise their research groups are essentially at risk, right? So we have a huge problem here with how we incentivise researchers within our academic system that kind of generates this culture around incremental research and just getting to the next nearest point to unlock the next amount of funding to secure longevity for the research group. So I think that's the one thing that we need to fix. How do we incentivise people to engage with industry, to engage and take risks around entrepreneurship and have a go and give them secondments into industry, or allow them to start up and fail and not have that affect their career trajectory or grant sort of, you know. And I guess the other side of that is the cultural aspects. I think we do have a little bit of a risk-averse culture in Australia comparable to the US. My time in the US was very refreshing from a risk-taking perspective. We don't have that same sort of drive here. So it's not that scientists need to become entrepreneurs, and I think we'll get to that later in the topic. I don't think that's the case at all. But we do need to at least understand and be cognizant of the fact that if we're putting billions of dollars into our research sector, we should be getting something out the back end. And so how do we drive those behaviours and that culture within our sector is partly due to incentives.
Yeah, I'd probably disagree with one thing there, but most of that's exactly what I'd say. Yeah, no, the controversial bit is that you can blame the researchers, in my view. So, quite seriously, I mean, why do researchers constantly suppress their big visions and tolerate getting these ridiculous 3-year ARC grants and such things, right? So they're only ever at the point of just making an incremental change. And they're not guaranteed funding for a long time, and the vagaries of the ARC system are such in Australia that you just can't plan for a long-term strategic development where you're going to be able to get funding a long-term strategic development where you can actually support it unless you're not happy with the situation. And too many of us are happy with that situation. And, you know, it doesn't matter how many people like me tell the ARC that. We need everyone to say it. And everyone has to say, well, I'm not going to take your bloody money because, you know, I've got better things to do with my life than incrementally work my way through the next 25, 30 years. So I'm pretty much of the opinion that the changes that are going to be needed to give people an incentive have to come from the researchers themselves. And having worked at NICTA, I can tell you that it's possible to do that. It's not easy, but it's possible, right? The biggest thing that happens as a result of this incremental funding, which is the main thing that's available to you, unless you are the absolute superstar and you can get an ARC special centre in which you get, I don't know what it is now, 7-10 years funding or something. And that's what you need. You need a long term to imagine a vision. So what I'd do at NICTA was take all the, turned out the God professors weren't very good at doing this, but to actually have a vision for where their technology or their science might be used and what difference it could make in some application somewhere. How could it advance mankind? How could it improve society? You know, how could it make life better for everybody? And get people to start seriously thinking about that, and then think about, because this is what their technology or the research they're doing could actually, where it could make a difference, and have them seriously think about it, and then go out and start talking to companies who might work in that space and have them identify where their technology might actually have a connection with the ecosystem and the market that they've got to enter into. And we managed to do that pretty successfully, but it is hard work, right? It took me about 2 years, having worked there for a year and deciding that we weren't getting anywhere. I totally reorganised NICTA. And we had a lot of money. We had $84 million a year to spend, right? And we were still doing ARC-style projects. And I said, we've got to have big ideas. So I stopped funding anything to do with that And I just said, give me your big idea and then we'll work with you. I got a good group of people in to actually work with them to map out the journey. It's like an expedition. It's like you imagine you're looking at climbing a big peak somewhere. Well, what's the peak in your area? It might be formal systems, which is what happened at New South Wales Uni, or various other fields, pain management, all of the things some of the things that NICTA did really well. And then people start to get behind that, and it's about a 12 to 24 month process to actually map out a project that looks fundable. And then I gave them a lot of money. So funding of all the people that were in NICTA were contributed, not all. Substantial number of the people were contributed from the universities. So that's all funded. And then on top of that, we had $84 million. So big projects would get all the people plus $4 to $5 million a year to spend. And they had it for 10 years if they needed it, right? Then the government decided that was too much and they closed down NICTA.
So
but you'd moved on by then.
Could I add to that? Because this is great, because I obviously don't know the Australian funding mechanisms so well, but one of the things that we found in the US, at least SRI, was that the researchers, you don't necessarily, they've got skill sets that may not be thinking about the entrepreneurial applications, right? And a lot of the technologies that we would consider to be disruptive today were incremental technologies, but used in a brand new way. GPS, right? Something called the internet. These are things that it took people who were outside of the research establishment that were working on them to figure out the new ways of using that same technology. And so one of the things that we did at SRI was we had a cadre of EIRs, entrepreneurs in residence, people who had previously started a company. They weren't researchers at SRI, but we brought them in. We opened up the door and basically said, look at everything we're doing. And if you find something really creative and can come up with that use case and work and convince us that this is worth spinning out, they'd be the CEO of the company, we'd license the technology, and we'd give them money to get started. And we actually found that to be a very effective way to come up with some of the more, you'd say, sort of innovative or disruptive ideas. It was using the same technology that we had, pulling it out into a new way. And so it may not always be just the researchers, right? You may have to get that outside look.
I should add, I've said, researchers should turn away from the ARC. You've got to do something because the universities, and this is where your point is important, universities need to credit you for doing something other than just publishing. And there's not enough acceptance of that still in the Australian system, but I'm a bit divorced from the Australian system to some extent, so maybe it's improved somewhat, and it sounds like it has at UNSW. But the main point about all of that, I think, is that you have to be able to get people to think differently. And the opportunities, so I did this myself, right? I could get ARC money. I didn't have any trouble getting ARC money, but that wasn't what I wanted. I needed a lot more money. So I did contracts for industry. And I ended up earning 10 times more money from industry than I ever got from the ARC. And I had a lot of good ARC funding. So, and the money from the industry was commensurate with the challenge you had. And the bigger the challenge you had, and the more they were prepared to fund it, the more money you had, and the more chance you had of being successful. And so industry, if you take on a challenge, you take on something that they're really interested in, that a company wants to make a product out of or improve something they're doing, they're going to be realistic about paying for it. So go outside the national funding system and get companies involved. That's another thing we do very poorly in Australia.
Thanks, Dave. So in the context of a university then, what should Australian universities do from the management perspective rather than the individual researcher perspective? What can Australian universities do to set up the ecosystem within the university to generate as many of these impactful ideas and get them out that they can? You've all seen universities in other parts of the world that do it perhaps better than we do. What should we do differently?
I like Bill's comments. It's all about engagement with industry, right? And the panel's gone rogue, basically. I'm disagreeing again on the research side, only because I believe that a lot of people get into research and they become scientists to add to the greater good of the scientific knowledge base. And whilst I agree that we need to teach researchers entrepreneurship skills, and we need to teach them how to engage with industry, and we need to teach them and hold them to account with doing research that actually adds value to society. And when you talk about the definition of impact, the definition of impact to me is creating some value, societal, environmental, economic. It's not necessarily commercialising technology and becoming a whiz-bang startup and making lots of money, right? There's many different ways to achieve impact, but I think the challenge is some of those people, they're never going to be entrepreneurs, and you can't make them entrepreneurs, and you shouldn't try to make them entrepreneurs, but you need to give them the skills to be able to marry their research and drive their research to the needs of industry and the society that they're developing that research for, and that should be mandated. So I think part of what we don't do well in the academic system is hold researchers to account to upfront talking about what impact is that research going to have on the real world, and then actually measuring those impact outcomes in some way, and it doesn't have to be monetary, but measuring those impact outcomes so that they're accountable. And again, I think the KPI incentives at the moment are not aligned to that, so we need to have risk tolerance around what they're doing so that they can reasonably explore these big ideas with industry and with the support of the academic institutions to be able to drive those research out into the real world.
So just on that, Michelle, and talking about not necessarily teaching all researchers to become business people, but all three of our panel members were technical scientists first and then made a transition to being very successful business people. How did you learn that craft?
It was all about risk tolerance. So I was just, I had no intention of being an entrepreneur. Everyone always asked me this question, were you selling things when you were a kid? No, I had none of that. I have literally none of the DNA of an entrepreneur. But what I did have is a thirst for knowledge and a thirst for achievement. And I constantly wanted to understand or increment myself in terms of understanding where my research could go and how to get the most value out of it. And so it's all about taking opportunities. And I had to, at the time when I stepped out of the university sector, it was really hard because I had everyone, my family were saying, why on earth would you throw away that scientific career that you worked so hard to develop? And my supervisors saying, well, when you've gotten over that thing that you're going through, let us know and you can come back. And it was like no one believed that I could do it. And it was just really that's what you're up against. And fortunately, I'm one of those contrarian people that's like, oh, you tell me I can't do it, I'm going to definitely do it now. But it's about just taking risks, I think. And I think that risk-taking culture is not part of the scientific community at the moment. So I think you can teach that to scientists and to researchers and give them bounds in which they can do that safely. And just one really practical thing in our commercialisation unit, we have trouble with our commercialisation managers trying to, some of them by nature, they want to commercialise technology and they want to stay with it because they've nurtured it, right? So let them stay with it. And you get management saying, well, why, what are we going to do? Then we're not going to have enough staff in the commercialisation function. But yes, that's success, right? If they've nurtured something, taken it out, and they've gone with it, that's what's going to drive the next people to want to join that commercialisation function so that they can do that. So invite the entrepreneurs in, let them see what you've got, allow them to take the technology out. If the scientists want to go with it,
Right.
give them some capacity to do that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. One of the things that's very important is, we always talk about IP and how important IP is to the startup. But just as important, and probably more so, is the IQ. So you need to transition the IP and the IQ, and the IQ is going to be the people who are working on it. Whether or not it's part-time or full-time, you've got to be able to be flexible and have, because there's the tacit knowledge that is just not going to be able to be sent to the institution without the people. And so I absolutely, totally concur with that. Every startup that I think I've ever been involved in that did not have the IQ but just had the IP failed. And it's really important that that be flexible. I also want to come back to something that both of you said. You used the phrase use-inspired research, so the Pasteur's quadrant and the incentives, because in Pasteur's quadrant there's the pure basic science, and that should be embraced as well, and that needs to be a very, very strong part of the foundation. That may not have an entrepreneurial aspect to it, but for those researchers that want to be in that use-inspired basic research box, they really should be either self-identified or others help and give them the additional entrepreneurial skills to, at least for them to recognize when they may have something, whether they spin it out or they identify it, could be really important, and having the incentive structures in place to support that. There are some universities in the US, tenure is very important in the US, and I think it's handled a little differently here, but tenure is considered incredibly important for an academic researcher. They actually now, several universities provide as part of the tenure, not just their impact index on publications, but entrepreneurship. Did they spin out companies? Did they have IP that was licensed out? That would actually count towards their tenure decisions, which is part of the incentive structures. So get the KPIs, get the incentive structures, and align them. People are rational, right? If the incentives are there, they will march in that direction.
Yeah. So let me give you an example of Imperial. They have a program called the Enterprise Lab. It's aside, it doesn't count for credit. It's aside from everything else. And it's given to undergraduate students, and it's essentially about entrepreneurship. So last year, they engaged 2,000 students who volunteered to come into this program. 2,000 of the 20,000 people, undergraduates at Imperial. And it's worth having a look at. There's plenty of stuff on the web on it, right? So Imperial has 20 times more spin-outs, and they have hundreds over the years, have had hundreds of spin-outs of undergraduate companies that have come from undergraduates, and they're 20 times any other university in the UK. So whatever they're doing a good job on it. So much so that some of the young academics I know over there go to and do that course themselves, right? They don't offer it to the academics, but they should be.
Thanks, Dave. Now, if I can move on to some practical matters relating to actually starting companies in Australia. We often hear that here in Australia it can be hard to attract funding and investors to scale up. How did you find that journey in your experience? And how did you manage the issue of when and how to accept diluting capital? Always the question people ask. Michelle, do you want to go first?
Very hard. I'm not going to lie. It was very difficult to raise the right type of capital in Australia, and part of it's a function of timing and the right capital at the right time, which I didn't fully appreciate. So what we have in Australia is a lot of early stage capital, which is great. It gets you started, family office funding, private investors. We don't have a lot of venture capital, particularly in the deep tech, deep science-based sectors. And they're very different. So we do, venture capitalists will tell you there's a lot of money in the ecosystem, but it's not for the stuff that's coming out of research that has a high risk profile and long timelines. And so if you look at the things that I've been involved in are healthcare, regulated medical devices, drug discovery, drug molecule, you got long timelines, clinical trials, high risk, really challenging regulatory environment globally. There's just not funding for that here. And then, so you have the options of kind of going to the US, which I did. I moved to the US for a couple of years to raise capital but US investors still view you as an Australian company. And so it is a really, I'm not going to lie, it's really challenging, and it's a very big barrier for a lot of the technologies. I think it's getting easier, but it's challenging. And I guess my counsel on that and what I am doing differently this time is engaging those US investors right from day one. So we have to teach, we talked about the culture within the university sector being a little insular and not risk tolerant, the impact not being kind of very well defined in terms of what they're doing and how it's going to impact society. I think the third layer to that is we're not really global in our thinking. And unfortunately, if you try and spin these things out in Australia and don't consider the rest of the world, and you're trying to have a massive scalable impact, you're going to hamstring yourself from day one. So having my time again, which I have now, I'm on company 3, hopefully this will be the one. Yeah. It's really about engaging early, engaging that right type of investor that's going to allow you to scale in the way that you can, because those other investors are great to get you started, but they're not going to help you scale.
Yeah, look, I'm raising money for a couple of companies now. It's very hard in Australia. Very hard not to lose the IP or control of the IP to the US, because all the stuff that I've been involved in is good, or I don't get involved in it basically, these days. I've got some choice, but it's very hard to get to scale up from Australia. So in my own company, we didn't take any venture capital in our first round. We did industry funding. So they were the venture arms of companies, right? But they're much more realistic on and not so concerned about valuation, so you don't get screwed too much on that one. And then they give you the amount of money that they believe and you believe together is going to get you to the next proof point of what you want to do. So I found in a number of companies I've been associated with that industry capital is a better way to go than venture capital. Particularly since the things I'm involved with are also big projects, they're long term, and they're going to need a lot of money at some point. So when it came for me to do a Series B funding, we could not raise the money in Australia. We tried hard to keep the company and the IP in Australia. But Australian funding was so far off the mark on what was needed, and were egregious in the amount of, the company they wanted to take, that we just thought this is ridiculous. And unlike many companies, this is for the Wi-Fi stuff, right? We did the first high-speed Wi-Fi chips, and immediately everybody in the US wanted to buy us. And we're saying, no, we're going to build a company in Australia, right? Nah, not possible. Because even to produce the product to meet our orders was going to mean we had almost none of the company left to us, right? It wasn't worth doing it. And we could, ultimately, Cisco Systems said, well, we'll buy you. We'll give you 565 million Australian dollars. Is that enough? Yep. That's enough.
Yeah.
So, and that worked out fantastically well for them, Within 5 years, they had $1 billion a year wireless LAN business, enterprise business. Mm-hmm. And we absolutely could have done that from Australia, right? Because we were we were a long way ahead of the rest of the world in it. And we developed it from the 1990. We started a project in 1990. 1997, we spun out a company because we'd taken it as far as we could in the university sector. And CSIRO. CSIRO funded all the research, right? So they owned all the IP for it. But yeah, we just weren't able to keep it here. So there is a really huge challenge. Now I'm really excited that at last the Future Fund, the NRF, National Reconstruction Fund, is starting to allocate significant amounts of money to some of the companies we have in Australia that need sums like from $50 to $150 million. And they are now making those allocations. Mm-hmm. So we're not getting it from the private sector. And I just think that's really encouraging. So maybe we're getting somewhere with that.
Thanks, Dave. Bill?
I'm not going to complain about too much money in the U.S. But I will say that the venture funding goes through cycles and matures itself. And so you mentioned that there's a lot of Australian money that's in early stage, and that is obviously good to get the company started. In the U.S., we're actually seeing two sort of relevant shifts. One is deep tech is back in favor. So that's a good thing. So it used to be focused quite a bit just on software for a while. Everything was going to become the next Google. Now there really is a lot of money going into deep tech in the US. And the other is the rise of, you mentioned industrial funding, but also industrial VC. So venture funds from the companies themselves. And that's really important as you get to like a Series B, because you want a strategic investor if you can get it. You want somebody who's in the industry. If you're doing anything in, say, data centers, right? You want NVIDIA as an investor in your company, because that's going to carry, first of all, it's going to get you a lot more money from other investors if you've got somebody like an NVIDIA on that. But they also have a customer potentially built right in to use that technology. And so what you're seeing is a lot more of the big industry creating their own venture funds, which is a really important component of the ecosystem that's coming in, and again, specifically for like Series B and beyond. So I would basically say, in the US right now, I think things are actually moving in a good direction in terms of making it more accessible. However, that may not suit, all of the needs of me wanting an Australian company to stay in Australia and all the rest of that. But at least there is more funding that's becoming available globally.
Well, Cisco let us all stay in Australia. I moved to the US, but most of the staff stayed here.
Yeah. So.
And they were terrific. They were willing to maintain in fact, when they were laying lots of staff off in Silicon Valley, they were building up our team out here, right? So they were very honourable in what they were doing. And then, Tech Rec got worse and worse and worse, and eventually they couldn't put any more money in. Yeah.
So I've got another practical question. So another topic that often comes up is around how to find the management team and when to hand over from the founding technicians to someone else. So I'm interested in your experiences in doing that and whether or not it worked and how you managed it.
Yeah, okay. So we were very lucky in having somebody who was very technical, actually had done a PhD in the area, had migrated, worked for Telstra, become head of finance for Telstra, having having sent him to an MBA at Harvard. He understood what we're doing perfectly and became our chairman. And then when it was time for us technical dudes to step back a bit, he said, "I'm now going to be the CEO, okay?" We said, "Yes, go for it." Yeah, so that worked that well. But on the other hand, I mean, that's been quite a problem in a number of the companies that I dealt with in the venture firm, where it was very hard to dig the founders out of the position, and more than one of the companies ended very badly because the founders just wouldn't play ball with not being the boss. So it's a challenge I haven't really solved.
Yeah, I think scientific founders can be really challenging because they hold on to the technology and they're deeply vested in the thing that they've built, but they don't necessarily have the management skills to be able to drive the company to where it needs to be. I haven't had that issue. Our founding team in all three companies have always been very pragmatic about, our time is until our time is, until we're no longer useful and can't do the job, then, we get people in who can do that. But I think within the university sector, you need to really intentionally orchestrate management teams. And quite often I have discussions with scientists that are wanting to spin out a company, and the professors will say, oh, this is my baby, like I want to run it. And I'm like, okay, but are you going to leave your professor position at the university? Are you going to leave your tenured position and go and run this company? Because that's a full-time job. You can't do that half-time. No investor will back you as a CEO founder if you're not willing to leave your scientific post. So, and then often the conversation changes to, oh, actually, no, I don't want to do that. What can I do? And then it becomes a conversation often around, scientific advisory board or a part-time fractional sort of chief medical officer or chief scientific officer to the company. And that's where you get the real value from them, keeping their intellectual capital in the company, but not having them run it. And then you get the full gamut of other, my co-founder now, who's managing director of my company, he started off, he did 2 PhDs, one in physics and one in nanotechnology, super smart guy, willing to do absolutely anything that the company needs, right? And he's a fabulous managing director, and he should absolutely drive that company until the point where it needs to grow and scale, right? So you can have scientists that become entrepreneurs, that develop those skills over time, but you just can't kind of retrofit someone who's not that into that role because it will fail.
Yeah, I would agree with that. When we spun out companies from SRI, we created the team. And as I said, most of the time it was an entrepreneur in residence that came in, already had skill sets that could take the company and run with it. Always, again, with some IQ that went with it. It was a rare unicorn where the researcher who developed the IP really was ready to be the CEO of a startup. And we had some, and they were very successful, but in general, we really would find a different role for that person, exactly as you said, to make sure that that IQ goes with the company, but having an experienced CEO to manage it. One of the problems that we found with researchers, you said it's their baby, right? They have a vision for what this should be that may or may not comport with what the market wants.
Yeah.
And they're going to drive it. And they've spent, the last 5, 6, 7 years developing this technology for a purpose that was in their head and not being willing to pivot.
Yep.
And almost every startup that I know of that's been successful has had to do at least one, if not multiple pivots to get to the right spot. And that's really hard.
Can I take up a point there?
Yeah.
So I think the point about, what was the point?
Something about management teams.
Management teams, yeah. I'll say first, we use the entrepreneur and residence arrangement really well at NICTA too.
Yeah.
So 3 of the spin-out companies we had were taken out by entrepreneurs and residents, right? So we copied that, probably from SRI actually. But the business side, one of the things that we tried to do when in the venture firm I was with, was to actually engage with the business people in the university. So people doing the MBA at Macquarie, it was, at Macquarie University. And we had them work with the team and from a very, very early stage and say, look, we'd like, let's do projects with them. So you work with them, they're doing their business cases. And what happened from that was only one of the 7 firms actually brought a person in who ended up running the company, right? So tapping into that resource in the university sector might be a way to go.
Okay, terrific. Well, we're getting close to time, so I might grab some of the audience questions. The one on the top of the list is, how important is being high-tech when starting up? Can a simple idea with a clear demand succeed without advanced innovation?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely, they're the
Yes.
best ones.
Yes.
Pretty
Winner,
straightforward.
chicken dinner.
All right. We got that one
However,
sorted.
it still needs to have some kind of defensibility so that it, something that would make it unique. It doesn't have to be technology, but something that is a defensible barrier to competition. Otherwise, it just becomes commoditized.
Maybe, or speed to market.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
But short-lived, yeah.
Okay, the next one is, as AI drives down the cost of services and knowledge work, how can a startup founder assess whether their skills and offerings are resilient against big tech?
Well, if I just had this whole session, I'd go into that. So I think part of doing your homework, and in fact, it's constantly what you have to do when you're in a company, is to know your ecosystem. You've got to know where you fit in and exactly what all the competition's doing and how you're going, right?
Yeah.
So that's all part of it.
Yep. The next one here is, how can students and early career engineers explore impactful technology-infused research in entrepreneurship, and is a PhD valuable for this path?
I would say a PhD is a license to problem solve. So yes, I do believe it's valuable, and I don't really care what you do your PhD in. I think that's kind of, it teaches you the persistence and the problem solving skills that allow you to take that methodology into any area of problem solving, which is everything that you do as an entrepreneur in a startup. So I would say PhDs are like sort of mini startups. But there are ways that you can, if you've got that entrepreneurial bent, industry PhDs are becoming much more common. And again, engage in industry, do something that's got relevance to something out in the real world, right? Talk to the market, understand what they're looking for, and then try and orient your PhD. Or if you're interested in a particular field, try and look ahead to what the future of that field's offering and try and position your PhD to something that's actually going to have significant value in the near term when you leave. Would be my guidance.
Yeah, Bill raised the point earlier about market, listening to the market and really listening, more importantly, hearing the market.
Yeah.
And because a lot of people say they listen to the market, and you get tech people who go out and they've got a vision bias. The bias is, this is my vision and that's where I'm going. And they can interpret almost anything they hear from the market as supporting their vision. But it's not what they're hearing. So I never let a CEO or person with the vision go out without somebody else with them.
Yeah.
So actually, they've always got to have at least one other person, preferably two, who kind of challenge them a bit and say, I don't think that's right, Jill. Really? That's not what I heard.
Yeah.
I've got one last question here. What mistakes did you make that you would advise others to avoid?
I don't think there's enough time.
Yeah.
You want to start? Or?
No, you start, please. After you. Wow. It's like a handball moment.
Lots of mistakes. A lot of them, some of the things that we talked about, I mean, these came from our own personal lessons and hard knocks. But one, being, kind of following what David was just saying, being stubborn about the idea that, no, I know better than the market knows. Well, that might be true, but the market's still the one that comes up with the money. And that one, you've just got to learn to, again, listen, hear, and be adaptable. The other thing that learned was that computer scientists have some phenomenal new algorithms, and they write lousy code. Every time SRI spun out a company that was using something that was from our information sciences, I always ended up having to apologize to them because they had to rewrite the code because it would be spaghetti code, you know, undocumented. And so one of the things that we learned was before we actually licensed out any software and algorithm, we actually put our own money in to sort of productize the software, at least get it documented, get it ready so that I wouldn't have to be spending all my time apologizing.
Thanks, Bill. Michelle?
I have some trauma around early pitch decks I took out to market. I've looked back at them and I'm like, oh gosh, no wonder that didn't take off. But I think so many mistakes. I think hanging on to the technology, taking too long, not jumping quick enough on investment, not moving fast enough, not anticipating competitors, not being really open and honest with yourself around the market feedback. Definitely done all of those things. But, you know, it's a learning experience. Like, you can't know these things, right? You know, no one's trained to be an entrepreneur. You have to live through it. I think that's the lesson. So it's just a matter of taking those and then, you know, hopefully you survive to try again and make it succeed.
Dave, have you made any mistakes?
Plenty. Yeah. Look, the biggest one I think that I recovered from over a lot of years was making bad partnerships. Because mostly what you do, most of the stuff we do in advanced technology, you don't all do yourself, you know. You've got partner companies that have to deliver parts of the solution, or there's a really close collaboration going on with a customer that you're building something, your first customer, you fall over backwards to trying to give them exactly what they want, and you're working really closely with them. But it happens so often, to me, especially early on, it happened that we weren't really as aligned as I thought we were. We seemed to have some mutual interest, but there was no mutual benefit in working together. You know, in fact, they said they were going to provide X, Y, Z at certain times, and they didn't. They expected other things from me. We never clarified all that up front. So I developed this process for actually partnering that has 4 stages, and I've got 23 seconds to tell you about it. Establish mutual interest, establish mutual benefit, do a detailed plan of how you're going to work together, do the legals last. Don't get the legal guys involved till right after you know what the business is, and do that properly. They can go in parallel, but do them in that order. When you actually tick off, yeah, this is good, this is good, this is good, do it in that order. And that's 4. Oh, we're 5 seconds over 6. There you go.
Thanks, David. So as David says, that is all the time we have tonight. So please join me in thanking our panellists. So we do have drinks and networking out here, and the panel members will be joining and floating around, so feel free, I'm sure they said this to me earlier, feel free to go up and approach them and ask them some more questions. So with that, thank you very much for your time and attention tonight, folks, and we look forward to seeing you outside. Thank you.